Hey everyone! Thanks so much for tuning in. My name's Anaya Zachary, and I will be doing a AP Human Geography lesson on migration. So we're going to go over some types of migration, causes of migration, anything you'd want to know about migration. I really like this topic. It's very important for not only the AP exam in May, but also just the course in general and any other history courses that you might take over the course of your school career. Before we get started, don't forget to follow Flyable on Twitter and Instagram and subscribe on YouTube. So by the end of the stream, you should understand types of migration and why people migrate. There's a lot of subtopics that we're going to go over under these two groups, but these are just the main overarching points that you want to know. So we're going to go over political, economic factors for migration. And the really big thing that I like about this unit is that a lot of the terms and key concepts that we go over come in pairs. So we have push-pull factors, we have forced and voluntary migration. So a lot of these things are easy to remember and easy to understand just because of the fact that they come in pairs. So you have one, you have the other, and they kind of contrast or complement each other. If you don't know what those mean, that's okay, because that's what we're going to go over in this stream. So the first thing I want to talk about is, what is migration? So migration, the standard definition is just a permanent move to a new location. So this can include environmental, cultural, or economic type. So most types of migration do fit under these categories. Environmental can include climate change, a natural disaster. These will cause people to migrate. Or an economic, this is the biggest type of migration, is economic. We're going to go over all of these. There's also cultural factors. And so migration is a form of mobility. And mobility is a general term that covers all types of movement, whether you're traveling to and from school, vacationing, circulation, which is like a circular, repetitive type of mobility. So migration is just like a subcategory of mobility, and it's a more permanent move. Excuse me. So yeah, geographers pay a lot of attention to migration because when migrants move, they bring their cultures and their traditions and their values from their home countries to their destinations, and this can really influence a country and the whole makeup of it. When there's a lot of migration, it can change what's going on in a country. It can change its culture, it can change its customs. So geographers pay a lot of attention to this type of mobility. Currently, about 2.8% of the world are international migrants. And that may not sound like a lot, but that's about 258 million people. So it's a ton of people who have migrated across countries. So yeah, it's a really big deal on just like a global scale, because all these people are moving countries and bringing their culture and their values with them. Okay, so we're going to talk about immigration versus emigration. So I'm sure most of you have heard of these from previous classes, but I'm just going to do a really quick overview of them and just explain what they are, the difference between them, and just how they relate to the topic in general. Okay, so immigration. This refers to a migrant that is traveling into a country. It always helps me to think immigration is going in. You have the I there. That's just the way I remember it. But just anytime someone travels to a place, then that would be considered immigration. So we have immigrants that come into the US. That's an immigrant. Okay. Emigration with an E. So we see that this refers to anyone who has left their country to go to a new one. I like to look at it and say emigration is to exit a country. We have the E there. These can be kind of confusing when you're saying them out loud, but eventually you'll just be able to look at it and be like, immigrant, come in, emigrate, to exit. Okay, so I just want to show you how related they are. I'm going to show you this picture. These are, it's a photo of Ellis Island. It's in 1904, if I remember correctly. But we see all these immigrants coming into the United States. And yes, while they are immigrants to the United States, they're also emigrants out of their home country. So it's like one country's immigrants, the people that have left, are another country's immigrants that are coming in. They're kind of related like that. I also want to really quickly touch on net migration. So net migration refers to the difference between the number of immigrants and the number of emigrants in a country. So if you have a positive number, that would mean that more immigrants are arriving, and you call that a net in-migration. And a negative number would mean that there are more people emigrating with an E from the country. So that would cause a net out migration. Neither is really better than the other. If you have a very, very large net out migration, that could be detrimental to your country. But if you have like a small net in migration or a small net out migration, it doesn't really, it's not a huge thing. But yeah, that's just something that geographers pay attention to with migration. Okay, forced and voluntary migration. We're going to talk about these two. The line is sometimes blurred between these, which is what I want to show you guys, how there's not a very, very clear distinction between forced and voluntary migration and interrelated. So voluntary migration is migration that's taken by choice. This is usually for an economic or environmental reason. Economic meaning a job, they're looking for jobs, or environmental, like they want a change of climate, so they're moving to someplace warmer. This is just any time where someone moves because they want to, and it's not like they're not being forced by something that they can't control. Well, forced migration, on the other hand, is a migration that they're compelled to migrate, where they don't have a choice of their circumstances, and they just have to move for, it can be cultural reasons or environmental reasons. Some like historical examples are the westward expansion of the US. Excuse me. As people, I'm sorry, for the westward expansion, I'm referring to just the fact where slaves especially, when people were brought to America for slavery and moved westward with the families that they were enslaved to, they had no choice in this. This was something that they were forced to do. So this would be considered forced migration. Another example would be refugees fleeing political unrest. This is not something they can control, so they are being forced to move, and that would be a cultural example. So I just want to talk to you about refugees, because this is a really, really important part of human geography. Just a quick vocab word you need to know. But this image shows a refugee camp in Kenya. So refugees are different from just like normal migrants because they can't return to their countries. They are being forced by usually a political reason, or sometimes environmental. If there's a natural disaster, then they move countries. That would be considered a refugee, where they have no way to return to their country of origin. And then also an internally displaced person is, or IDP for sure, I've also heard it called that. That's the same as a refugee, but they don't cross country borders. So those are very similar. Just one moves internationally, and one just stays within the country and just moves. So yeah, that's just someone, they're escaping maybe persecution, whether it's religious, political, or because of a natural disaster, anything like that. If they can't return to their country, then that would be considered a refugee. Okay, so I'm going to go over some examples. I'm going to show you a picture, and you guys comment in the comments over here, and you let me know if you think it's voluntary or forced migration. So here you go. Here's the first one. This looks like a flooded area. We see that it's probably not safe for whoever was living here to return. So what do you guys think this is? Go ahead and comment if you think it's forced or voluntary migration. I'll give you guys a second here, but yeah, with these, you're going to see as we go along just how related these are to where the point it's kind of, or to the point where it's kind of difficult to tell the difference between the two. So it gets a little confusing. But yeah, does anyone have an idea for that one of what they think it is? Forced. Yeah, good job. This is forced migration because whoever was living here can't return. So this would be considered forced migration. The next picture we're going to look at is a snowstorm. Which do you guys think this is? Or it's just a very cold climate, it looks like. We don't know if it's a storm. We just see a lot of people driving and some pretty harsh weather. I think it's forced because they don't have a choice of their circumstance. Okay, so this one is kind of cool. It's can be either, because since we don't have a lot of information on the image, it can be either one. So we see if it was a storm and it wasn't safe for these people to live here, then that would be considered forced migration. But if it's just very cold climate and they're just traveling to go to somewhere warmer, then that would be considered voluntary because they have a choice. So as you see, it's just, you just kind of use context clues. And since we didn't have a lot here, this one can be either. We don't know exactly what's going on. We just know that they're leaving and it's cold. So we just kind of use clues from what we have to draw a conclusion. Moving on to the next image. This is actually depicts the Trail of Tears. If you don't know what that is, it's when Native Americans were, the government said that they had to basically get off their homeland and were made to go live on reservations. So which do you think that one is? Okay. Does anyone know? Alrighty, I'm gonna go ahead and tell y'all. It is, that one would be forced migration. Pretty straightforward. They didn't have a choice in whether or not to migrate. Yeah, that one would be forced migration. The next one is a job interview. Okay, let me fix the, here, I'm going to share my screen again and fix this because okay, there we go. That should be better. It's a little bigger. My bad. I didn't mean to have that up like that. Okay, voluntary. Yes. This would be considered voluntary migration because the person that's applying for a job is moving for economic reasons, which 9 times out of 10 will be voluntary migration just because they look for different economic opportunities. That would be considered voluntary. Awesome. Okay, we're going to go on to the next set of keywords, which is push and pull factors. So push and pull factors are, again, pretty related, but it's not to the point where you can't tell the difference. I like these because it's kind of give and take. So if there's something that's pushing someone, then there's another factor that's pulling them to a different area. So we're just going to go over these. So a push factor will induce someone to leave where they're currently living. So this can be, again, economic, this can be cultural, basically anything that makes someone not want to live where they're living. An example would be, I don't know, education. So if their education system in an area is poor and someone it's a poor like system of education and someone wants to find better schooling in that area, then they will that would be considered a push factor because they're being pushed out of where they're living because of a factor that they don't like. And then a pull factor, pretty straightforward. This would encourage someone to immigrate to a certain location. So if we have immigrants coming, like using our other example, if someone emigrates out of a country because of a push factor, then they'll be pulled to another country and they would immigrate into that country because of another factor that kind of I guess balances out the thing that they were leaving behind. So if someone leaves because of the education system, then they would immigrate because of a pull factor. I see a question here. Amanda, is a push factor always going to be voluntary? Okay, no, that's the short answer. Basically because sometimes, like we saw with the refugees, they had no choice and of, say, cultural factors. They're being pushed out. Like with our example we saw with the Trail of Tears, this was something that they were forced into doing. And that wasn't a voluntary choice. And that would be considered a push factor just because of the fact that they are being pushed out of their current location. Good question. So yeah, I'm going to, again, go through some examples and I'm going to give you a push factor. And I want you guys to try to think of a pull factor that would work for this. So we'll go with the first one, high crime rates. So what do you think would be a pull factor that would entice someone into moving to a different area if they were being pushed out of their current location because of high crime rates? I just always remember, usually, in most cases, if there's a factor causing someone to move, there's another factor somewhere that's making them want to come to another place. It's like we saw with the poor education systems. A better school system would be a reason for them to want to move. Okay, does anyone have an idea for this one? High crime rates, what would be a pull factor? No one? Okay, so this, you could say lower crime. Any idea would work, honestly, if you said like better systems, like better police force, someone who's able to keep the crime regulated, that could work too. Basically just anything that kind of, again, balances out the factor that's pushing the people out of their current area. They can move somewhere with more police. Right, yeah, for sure. Right, we're gonna go to another one, disease. So if there is an epidemic or an outbreak of some sort of disease in an area, what do you think would cause someone to want to move locations? I see a question here. Do reasons to stay ever outweigh pull factors? Yeah, of course. But we don't really know of those just because we're studying the migration. But I'm sure that if say like family, if someone had family in an area where they currently lived, then it might outweigh the fact that, I don't know, there's a school systems. If someone says, oh, well, I want my child to grow up around their family, around their culture, then that might outweigh the pull factor or the push factor of a, a poor school system, which would in turn outweigh the value of the pull factor of a better school system somewhere else. So yeah, definitely sometimes that would happen. Okay. Does anyone know for the disease push factor, what would be a reason or what would be a pull factor for this one? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and, move somewhere where there's more doctors. Yeah, definitely. I said better medical care. Yeah, for sure. So if there was an outbreak of disease somewhere, they would try to move somewhere where that disease rate is lower, where it hasn't affected the population as much, or where there's just better medical care to better care for those people. Same if, along with just the medical side of things, if someone was sick or had some type of illness that couldn't be treated in their current location, they might be pushed out of the location where they are and migrate to somewhere where there are better facilities to care for them. That could also be considered a push or pull factor. Better healthcare system. Yeah, for sure. Anything basically that relates to that would work. Next one, lack of jobs. So if the economy makes it so that way there's not a lot of jobs in an area, what do you guys think would be a pull factor that would encourage someone to come to a different country? Anyone know? If they are being pushed out because of the economic system, what would be a reason to migrate to a different place? Okay. Do you want me to give that one to y'all? All right, we're going to go with new work opportunities. That's the answer I got for that one. Does anyone have another idea for lack of jobs in an area? Okay, well, but yeah, I just wanted to really emphasize this one because a lot of push and pull factors are related to economic reasons. Many times someone will, especially for voluntary migration, will choose to migrate because they are without a job. They will look for an opportunity where they can get a better, more efficient, better paying job. So most of the time, when we're talking about voluntary migration, it's going to be because of money. Yeah, just keep that in mind when you're looking at voluntary migration. Okay, I think this is the last one. Religious persecution. So if there's a pull factor, what do you think that would be in this case? If there's religious persecution in an area? Anyone? Religious persecution. So that could refer to, or any persecution in general, honestly, could work for this one. For example, just like racism or any case where the people in an area don't feel or aren't welcomed, I guess, by the people in their current location and they choose to move. So they may be pushed out by that. What would you say is a pull factor in this case? Anyone? Okay, well, okay, I will get to that one in a second, but I'm just going to say religious freedom. That could be an example of that. If someone is pushed out because of religious persecution, they would seek to go somewhere where they have freedom to practice their religion. And this could work for any type of persecution. If someone's persecuted because of their ethnicity, then they would choose to go somewhere where they aren't where they do feel safe, being the ethnicity that they are. Can you move where there's people who have your religion? Yeah, okay. I thought that was a question. My bad. Yes, people who have your religion, if that would most likely be more welcoming to the religion that you have. So that would definitely be a pull factor in this case. Okay, moving on. I'm going to talk about interregional versus intra-regional migration. Excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of water. But yeah, for me, this was the most confusing one just because of how similar these words were. But no need to be nervous about that. We're just going to go over these quickly and make sure that you understand the concept of these, because again, it's pretty important for understanding the topic. And yeah, we're going to go into that. So interregional migration refers to the movement from one region of a country to another. So this could include moving. So if we take the United States, if you're moving from a coastal city to the Midwest, that would be considered interregional migration because they're moving somewhere where the region is very similar to somewhere where it's very different. This occurs quite often, especially since it's within one country. This doesn't apply to, say, moving from within one country from one region to a different region. And then intra-regional migration would refer to migration from within one region of a country. So if you live in the Southwest and you migrate a little bit further north within the Southwest, that would be considered intra-regional migration because you're staying within the same region, but you're also changing your location. Are there any questions on that? I know this one tends to be kind of confusing when it comes to these words. Just let me know if you have any questions about what's going on in this topic. There's no real way that I have to remember these. Just remember, intra-regional is within one region. Inter-regional is going within the different regions of a country. No questions? Yeah, guys, just feel free to make sense to me. Awesome, cool. Glad you all understand that. I'm going to move on to intervening obstacles. So this refers to something that challenges or hinders migration. So anything that's keeping you from migrating or making it difficult to migrate, that would be considered an intervening obstacle. We call it intervening because it kind of it disrupts the flow or the process of migration. It makes it difficult to migrate. So again, we're going to look at our three main reasons or forms of migration, and those are economic, cultural, and environmental. So there can be economic intervening obstacles. There may be a cultural intervening obstacle. Basically, just anything that's keeping you from migrating would be considered one of those. So here we see an environmental obstacle. This is a mountain region in Asia. Environmental obstacles are mainly in developing countries just because now we have available transportation to get from one region to another. Like several centuries ago, with the westward expansion of the United States, it was difficult for people to cross mountains or just any kind of obstacles that they have, just because they didn't have the technology or transportation needed to do so. Like now we have airplanes. You can easily cross a mountain chain in a couple of hours, when back then they didn't have that. Or in developing countries where they're not able to have access to those things, then that would be a very big obstacle to migration. Another example would be the Atlantic Ocean. When um, when people from Europe were emigrating from Europe and coming west, the Atlantic Ocean was something that they had a hard time crossing because it was huge, and this is a huge environmental obstacle to migration. We're going to look at political obstacles. Immigration laws can really inhibit migration into a country just because of the fact that when a country's government places intentional obstacles to migrating, then it makes it pretty difficult for migrants to enter that country. And that would be considered an intervening obstacle because it makes it difficult for them to go into a country. Are there any questions on those with the intervening obstacles? Another example would be racism or xenophobia. Xenophobia is the fear of basically foreign people. So if there's a country that really fosters racism or just a group of people in general, that may make it hard to migrate, because when you're trying to come into a country and the people of that country are pushing you out, that would definitely be an intervening obstacle because it kind of hinders the migration and the connections to make with that country. Oh, good. I see a question here. Oh, my bad. Can you give some examples of forced migration? Yeah, forced migration, basically, like we saw, I can go back to that one for you really quickly. Here, like we saw the Trail of Tears, that would be considered a really good example of forced migration. Basically just the fact that they didn't have a choice in their migration. That would be forced migration. Okay, back to our political intervening obstacles. Were there any questions on that one? We all good? Awesome. So we're going to go into Ravenstein's migration laws. So I want to introduce you to a guy named Ernst Ravenstein. He was born in 1834. He passed in 1913, and he was from Germany. He moved to the United Kingdom, and in 1885, he published this book called Theories of Migration. And this is a very, very important book to geographers today, because it really it shed light on to some of the migration patterns that were happening at that time, and they continue to occur today. While some of them have changed, a lot of the things that were happening still do continue to happen today. So they're really important with migration. So there are 11 laws, 11 theories of migration that Ravenstein came up with, but I've combined them into 3 key points, and I'm just going to summarize them for you here. So the first one, most migration is short distances. So in most cases, migrants are going to travel short distances. This is largely due to a factor or a phenomenon called distance decay. So what distance decay refers to is basically the further away someone is from something else, the less interaction that they will have with this thing. For example, if you moved away from your hometown, the people that live in your hometown, you might have less connection with them. You might fall out of touch with them, and this is due to distance decay. Basically, just the closer you are to something, the more interaction you'll have with it, and the further away, the less interaction you'll have with it. So people are going to try to avoid that, which is why you see more intra-regional migration. We talked about that, where they're going to want to stay within the same region. So yeah, as we see with this map of Mexico, the people here are being moved along shorter distances. The Holocaust would be another example of forced migration. Yes, that's a very good one. When the Jewish population did not have a choice in their migrating and into the ghettos or concentration camps. Yes, very good example. They had no choice in whether or not they wanted to move. This would be considered a political reason or cultural. The as an example of migration. I see a question here. Is technology affecting distance decay and in turn migration? That is a very, very good question. Yes, as you move, or before we had phones or the internet or social media, technology would be a huge factor in, or the lack of technology would be a huge factor in distance decay, because you had no way to communicate with people or any kind of factors as you moved. But nowadays, when you move from the example I gave, your hometown, you can connect through social media, through the internet, with these people that you moved away from. So now distance decay may not be a huge factor in keeping people where they are. And like I said, Ravenstein's book was published a very, very long time ago, so a lot of these have changed slightly. But very, very good question. I see another one here. Does people being able to connect over technology contribute to a reason and just not migrate at all? Yeah. Like I said, the technology, or does it contribute to migrating even more, because now you can migrate without losing connection? Right. So I would say that since there is technology, there's more of not necessarily a push, but just a kind of a reason where the distance decay doesn't have as big of an effect on people wanting to stay in their current location, because they're able to connect and still be able to have contact with the people or with their current region. Then yeah, that might be a reason for them to be able to move. Okay, we're going to go on to the second key point in Ravenstein's migration laws. Long distance migrants are usually single young adults. So this image that you see here is in Australia in 1921. So we see some young men disembarking a ship. So young adults make up most migrants. This is something that's still true today, though we do have a lot more families migrating. But like if you have elderly people, you're not going to see a lot of migration with that, just because as you grow older, you have more of an incentive to stay in your current location. For example, education might be a push factor, but for the elderly population, education might not be as big of a factor for moving as it would for younger people. But a big thing with this is that in Ravenstein's book, he stated that the young adults were mostly men. But now there's been a large increase in the amount of women since he published his book in the 1900s. So I just want to know, why do you guys think that this is? Why do you think that there has been a huge change where it's almost switched, where there's more women, young women migrating than men? Just let me know what you think in the comments, and I'm going to answer this question here. Does this have to do with job opportunity, with less reasons to stay, such as a family already settled? Do you mind clarifying, Amanda, on what you mean for job opportunity. Are you referring to the young adult migration, like in Ravenstein's second law, or is that something different? Just clarify. But yeah, just want to know why do you all think that there are more women migrating than men now in our current, for the second law, it is mostly males. Women had less rights than men. Definitely. Yeah. Women had more of an incentive to stay because of basically if the young man had more oh, okay, you're clarifying your question. 1 second, Amanda, I'll get to you in just a second. But yeah, so now the women are able to move because there's not much of the cultural incentive to stay and be homemakers or be working at home. Before, it was mainly men moving and migrating across the country, but or across between countries. Men are migrating more during that time because of the role of women. Yeah, for sure. The role of men was more to establish the home and to create new opportunities. So they would be the long distance migrants in that case. And women during that time were expected to kind of stay home and my bad. Were expected to stay home and take care of the home. So they wouldn't be migrating as much in that case. And then back to your question, if the young men have more job opportunities, are they more willing to move because they may not have a family already in their original town? Right. So if we're looking at the single young part of this law, definitely the fact that they're not already settled down and they don't have a family that they're expected to take care of, this would definitely contribute to the fact that a lot of people moving are single. They don't have a family to take care of or that to settle down with. So yeah, when they're younger, they're more have a little bit more freedom to migrate long distances. Awesome question. Okay, moving on to the third migration law. Most migration reasons are often economic. I have touched on this one a little, but I just like to bring it up again because it's a very, very big part. In human geography in general, you're going to see a lot of reasons for basically anything. Is economic because money is a huge driving factor for just humans in general. So a lot of times you're going to find that when people move, it's because of economic reasons. They're going to choose to migrate because of some economic factor pushing them out of a region, like they don't have a job or just anything like that. Most people are moving to find work, more so than the cultural or environmental factors. Not that this doesn't happen, but a lot of times when we're looking, especially at voluntary migration, this is going to be a reason that they migrate, is the economic reasons. I just want to go over some words. Oh, does anyone have any questions on Ravenstein's laws? I know this kind of was a lot condensed. Does anyone have anything that'd like me to clarify or go over with these things? I know that was a lot that I just kind of threw at you, but just let me know if you have anything that you'd like me to restate or clarify or go over. I'll give you a few minutes. But yeah, just going back, we see here, this is not all of the rules or the laws of migration of Ravenstein. He did publish a book, but this, they're kind of interrelated, these laws. So I kind of condensed them so that way they're a little bit easier to understand and see here. Okay, are we all good on Ravenstein's laws? I don't see any questions or comments here. Okay, I'm going to go on to our next part, but just let me know if you have any. Feel free to comment in the chat here or ask a question. Okay. So, vocabulary. These are a couple words that do come up a lot in human geography, and there are some words you should just add to your vocabulary as we're going through and looking at migration. So the first one is brain drain. This refers to the emigration of highly trained or educated people from a country. So doctors or scientists migrate to make better use of their abilities in another place. So it just basically refers to when someone who has a high degree or high talent, in terms of usually like STEM, like science, technology, anything like that, if they migrate, then that would be considered brain drain when it's a huge immigration. So it's pretty good for the location where the migrants are immigrating into, but for the country that the migrants are leaving behind, it's kind of rough because they're not able to have this population of highly trained people in their country. I see a question here. Can you talk about nomadism? Yeah, this is kind of a early form of migration that occurred. This isn't, when we look at nomadism, it's kind of like there's a lot of push factors, and many of the pull factors are to find food. Is there a specific question within that you'd like answered when it comes to nomads and people like that? But good question. Yeah, that was a form of migration that was huge in the people weren't settled and they did need to migrate to find food. This was before the whole agricultural revolution when they weren't able to mass produce food like that. But yeah, going on to brain drain again, I'm just looking, yeah. Are there any questions on that one? I know it's kind of a difficult topic to understand at sometimes. Nomads moved looking for following the food source. Yeah, awesome. Their push factor was basically lack of food in the area, so they would have to get up, get all their stuff, and move to somewhere where they could find food, where they could find resources to sustain themselves. Chain migration. Chain migration refers to when migrants from a particular place follow others in emigrating to another country. So, for example, I'm just going to clarify that. Say your people from your family or people from your town or wherever you're living move out of your town and you and your family pick up and move to wherever they moved, that would be considered chain migration, which just occurs in kind of a chain. People move, the more people move, and it just kind of makes a ripple effect. So yeah, an example would be how Mexicans prefer Texas and California to immigrate to. You see there's a large Mexican population in Texas or California, while people from Cuba may prefer to move to Florida because communities of their same origin already reside there. You see a large Cuban population of Florida, not only because it's closer for one, but there's a large Cuban population in Florida, and there's a large Mexican population in Texas or California. It's easier to migrate when there's people from your culture or region in that area. In New York, we have a lot of Puerto Ricans. Yeah, that's also a place where there are a lot of people that migrate too. Puerto Ricans chose to migrate to New York, and that in turn makes more come over. It's just kind of a whole ripple effect. Once someone moves, someone else does, and it just kind of, everyone will follow. This is important because it gives you a way to kind of predict how communities of immigrants might grow. So if a geographer was trying to figure out how we'll give the Cuban example, the Cuban population in Florida, if they were trying to kind of determine how the Cuban population would grow over the next, say, 20 years, then they would look at what has happened in the past. And they'd say that there is a large Cuban population migrating in the past 20 years that they've had. So there will most likely be the trend will follow in that case. I see a question here. What about when chain migration occurs and has many stops and then people stay, moving west? Yeah. So chain migration isn't necessarily like linear. Like it's not for sure this person will move and then this person will move right after. Sometimes people will choose to stay for personal reasons. I'm looking here, the Mormons moving west, and there were families who stayed and didn't go all the way west, right? The people that are migrating aren't necessarily going to definitely follow people that are moving as well. This section will really connect to the urban unit when you talk about ethnic enclaves. Yeah, for sure. A little preview here. Ethnic enclaves are just a group of people of the same ethnicity. So we see chain migration here because when people migrate in chains, then they're going to seek out people that are of the same ethnicity or culture or background as them. So they're going to look for an ethnic enclave to kind of get on their feet in this new country, because when there aren't a lot of people that are like you, it might be easier to find someone who is of the same background as you to move to. I see another question here. The difference between interregional and international migration. Yeah, so this is kind of like our intra-regional and so international migration is when someone moves across countries. So if someone moved to from Germany to France, that is international because they moved to a different country. Interregional is when someone moves across regions. So that's a good question. It's kind of confusing to know the difference between those, but yeah. Inter means between, so international is between nations. Awesome, glad you picked up on that. Right, and then interregional is in between different regions. That's a good way to remember that. Thanks, Amanda, for that tip. And yeah, good question, Claire. It's kind of confusing, but once you see national to move in between nations and then regional to move to a different region. So yeah, we went through brain drain and we went through chain migration. Are there any questions on those two? I know you asked a few, just wanted to make sure that we're all good with that. Awesome, okay. So if we're, intra-regional will be within the region, inter-regional between regions. Awesome, thanks, Amanda. Right, so if someone is moving within a region, like we said, that would be intra-regional migration because they're moving within this region. But when someone is choosing to go to a different region, that would be interregional migration. Okay, if we're all good on that, I'm going to move into a quick recap of what we've gone over, just to make sure that we're all good before the stream ends. If there's any questions, feel free to ask them, just so that way we make sure that you guys are confident and clear on the information that we went over in the lesson today. So we went over immigration and emigration. Remember, immigration means coming in, emigration means exiting an area. We're all good on that? Forced and voluntary, that one was pretty straightforward. Remember that when someone is being forced to migrate, that is when they have no choice over their migration. We went over refugees, which is a big group of people that are being forced to migrate. It's forced migration when you basically cannot return to your place of origin. We have voluntary migration. those are pretty straightforward. We have push and pull factors. So remember, for every push factor, there's a lot of times a pull factor that goes along with that kind of balances it out. So we had the disease. If there was an epidemic in an area, then the better healthcare in another area would be a factor to pull them into that. So yeah, always just look at that with push and pull factors. There's most of the time a kind of a balance between it. So something pushes them out, and then something that relates to that will pull them into another area. We had interregional and intra-regional migration. We just had a pretty good discussion on that. I think you guys are good. Remember, intra is between the regions, and then intra is within the region. We went over Ravenstein's laws. We talked about how most migration is short distances, and that most migrants are young adults. And we talked about how the roles of men and women in migration has changed, and we just went over those laws there. Real good. Any questions on those? The main thing I would have you take away from this is that most people emigrate for three reasons: in search of jobs, for cultural freedom, and for environmental comfort. So remember, the biggest one is often economic. So a lot of people will migrate to find a job or to find a better economy. And then cultural freedom, that could be to escape religious persecution or to escape like ethnic persecution. That would be one as well. We looked at the Holocaust. We looked at things like that. That would be a good example. And then environmental comfort. That comfort is kind of misleading. For example, if someone is pushed out because of a natural disaster like an earthquake, they're not necessarily looking for comfort in the region that they're immigrating into. They're more looking for somewhere that, if it was voluntary migration, for example, moving south to find somewhere where it's warmer or where the climate is better, that would be considered environmental comfort. And that's about it for that. That was what we went over today. Are there any questions on anything that we looked at or anything that we went over? We had some really good questions. Thank you all for tuning in. It was a really good time. Looks like Claire just had a realization here. Makes sense. Okay. Yeah, thank you guys so much. Have a good day, and thanks for tuning in. Of course. Thank you. Bye, guys.